well as the trade contractor pre-qualification. The 90% CD documents will be submitted with the package to the MSBA as scheduled on August the 17th. We've got the estimates and the design reviews currently underway. The MSBA commissioning agent is reviewing the package as well. The estimate reconciliation is scheduled for August 11th, and everything's on target for that. The design phase completion is expected about the end of September, and we're on track for that. Since we are going CM at risk, we, I guess, use the term trade contractors. Typical, many might be more familiar with filed subcontractors, but the project's over $10 million, so that requires pre-qualification. There's been a pre-qualification committee established. We received 102 statements of qualifications from interested subcontractors. If I can get the next slide, please. So this lays out the trade category, say masonry, we got 8. There's the estimated cost of the masonry work. So again, we got at least 3 statement of qualification submissions for each of the trades, which was pretty good because now we don't have to re-solicit any of those. In the mechanical and the electrical, next slide, please. We got 7 HVAC firms and 8 electrical. So it looks like we should have some pretty good competition. We'll go through the pre-qualification process, and only those subcontractors that successfully achieve a pre-qualification will be invited to bid. So again, the subcontractors in the trade categories will be pre-qualified trade contractors for our project. Okay. Any questions? So again, we're continuing on schedule, on budget. Okay, really one of the prime events, the designers now will walk through the 90% CD, and then at the end of that presentation, we will seek your approval to submit it. Thank you.
Just quickly, the meeting tonight actually may ultimately be quite brief because at 90% construction documents, we really don't have anything from a design standpoint to present that would be any different than the 60% construction documents, just as Mark indicated. We do have the 90% drawing set on the floor, the 2 specification volumes and the 2 drawing volumes. And we have expanded some of the detail in those documents, but keep in mind at this point in time, we're into construction. We've released all the concrete, all the footings, foundations, all the steel, all the site work. We really don't have the opportunity to change the design. So just as Mark described, it's really just expanding on those documents. Troy has prepared a quick review of some of the things we do during this phase of the project, but essentially we're very close to complete with that technical package, and we'll summarize for any of you that wish to hear it quickly, kind of what happens in our office during this period of time, and then we can certainly answer any questions. But it won't be as exciting as a design presentation.
I apologize for interrupting you. We can toll the clock. I feel like with BevCam filming and people who are going to watch this at home, probably fair that we introduce Mark Lydon, who spoke a few minutes ago, is with our owner's project manager, and his associate Tom Ellis is here as well from Heary International. And then Scott Dunlap and Troy Randall are with our architects, AI3, and you'll hear after them from Bob Gilchrist, who's with Agostini Bacon, our construction manager, and one of the principals, Steve Agostini of Agostini Bacon, is here as well. Go ahead, thanks.
And we're going to leave most of the time tonight actually for Bob from Agostini, because there is an enormous amount of work that has been completed at the site. It's actually shocking how quickly the construction is moving along. I think those of you who wanted some explanation last time with regard to how we might make up a few weeks, that had been lost early on will now see that the project's actually moving ahead of schedule. And I don't want to steal Bob's thunder with regard to that, but it really is, we did a quick tour this evening, and it really is amazing how efficient, organized, and effective the work that's been done so far is. So we're very pleased with that. In our minds, we're kind of into construction at this point in time. We are going to summarize what's been going on in our office, but certainly nothing new from a design standpoint. So Troy, if you just want to talk through some of the items that have been completed.
Yeah, you bet. Just a few minutes I'll take to go through. I'm not going to go through every single line item. We'll be here for a while. A significant amount of work has happened over the last several months through the summer. Scott mentioned the 90% estimating set is on the floor. That's one package with a volume 1, the architectural volume 2, structural, mechanical, electrical, fire protection, site and civil on volume 1 as well, and then the 2 specification documents. The amount of detail that's put into these drawings is immense, and it equates to, just in very broad terms, about 100 more drawings with the set from the 60% to the 90%. We're over 500 drawings, and we'll see a slide, the third slide that we get into. But this first slide just identifies a series of meetings, and you'll see, you'll notice that a lot of these meetings occur with reps or construction manufacturers or finishes related product finishes for the building, with porcelain tile, wood ceilings, epoxy terrazzo, looking at the installation of the epoxy terrazzo, control joint locations, the transitions, the finishes, and working with the manufacturers on that, and also just talking with the city about the finishes. Roofing, working out the detailing on the roofing transitions with flashing, with the blocking, with the conditions that we have on site. Meeting with the food service department, the city's food service personnel, in going through the detail of the plan that was designed with their assistance, as well as the cut book on every single piece of equipment that's identified within the food service in the kitchen area. Hussey seating was a manufacturer we use as a basis of design for the auditorium and the gymnasium bleachers. Nichiha coordination of the exterior envelope and the installation of the system itself and the transition details. Theater coordination as well. Glazing, glass and glazing, looking at the various components of glass and glazing, refining that, and working with the manufacturers and our energy consultants to hone in on exactly what the glazing is. Manufactured casework, FF&E, starting that process, and that entire process will begin with the faculty and staff in sometime in September, and then looking at additional flooring. With this second,
Troy,
this
quick,
third,
Troy, I'm sorry.
yes.
You just mentioned FF&E. You talked about meeting with faculty and staff. That's separate and apart from the FF&E committee from this group, or did you mean that was all one and the same?
The furniture, fixtures, and equipment discussions and meetings will start with the meetings with the faculty and staff.
Okay.
Separate from this this meeting or this group,
Right.
starting in September.
But we also do have an FF&E committee made up of members of this. Who volunteered to be part of that? I thought we had 4 or 5 people in total. We'll have to go back and look at the notes, but so when the time comes, we'll need to include members of the building committee in the conversation as well.
Yep. Perfect. This is a list of discussions, meetings, coordination meetings, conference calls that we have on a regular basis through the design process with our energy modeler, BIM modeling, our electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, technology, accessibility, building envelope reviews. Those are a series of meetings that we have on a regular basis with the various consultants or in-house personnel related to components of the building. I won't go through each of them, but it continues on a daily and sometimes a weekly, if not sometimes multiple times a week through this latter phase of the design process. The building product representatives, a lot of, on the left-hand side category, there, as I mentioned, there are a lot of manufacturers that we contact and consult with to provide guidance in their particular area of expertise and help the design process and provide further documentation and delineation of their systems within our specifications or the building design. And you can see a list of those on the right. Some of those, in this particular list, is completely different than the list that we had at the prior meeting. This particular list is a lot of lighting, mechanical, technology-related manufacturers that we've been in touch with related to building systems within the design. On the right-hand side, as I mentioned, the 90% construction documents, over 100 pages of more detail within the building, and results in the larger set of drawings. I know Agostini loves to see those large sets of drawings with the amount of detail in them. And the early package has went out quite a while ago, and the next package, as Mark mentioned, is the final package, which is the 100% documents at the end of September. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Gilchrist to talk through the construction and the status.
Thank you, Troy. We've got a series of photos here just to show you some of the progress that we've got going on at the site. This picture here shows, is looking from Cabot Street across the new Library Media Center area. And you can see, let's see, which one's the pointer right in the middle? So you can see a typical pile that's been driven that will support a future slab. The lower piles have been driven and have the reinforcing steel welded to them to tie into pile caps and grade beams throughout the project. You can see just beyond the Library Media Center area, a dirt area that looks like it's 3 or 4 feet higher than the building, and that's the outdoor learning area. That was some fill that we brought in to bring it up close to finished grade, and we've actually started yesterday the drilling of wick drains on the site. I don't think we have a photo of that, but that process started yesterday to try to help consolidate some of the clay and limit some of the settlement to early on in the project so we don't have a problem later on down the road. Here's another shot just looking across the site. Again, similar pile caps that are supporting the slab are up a little bit higher than those that are going to be supporting pile caps themselves. You can see a piece of PVC pipe here. What we've done here is we've actually put a steel plate several feet underneath the ground before we started bringing any fill in, and it's got a steel rod inside that column, inside that pipe that we monitor the settlement of every week so that we can tell how much settlement occurs based on the fill that's brought in on the site. You can still see the pile driving rig in the back of the site, but I'm happy to report that we essentially finished pile driving last week on the site. We have one more pile that's in question right now that the structural engineer wants to add inside the building, and we're working through that to see if we can't reinforce the pile cap and do something different on that. Here you can see again the same nice neat slopes, some backfill material up against the slopes. This will be a perimeter wall of the building, and things staying nice and neat, rebar being welded in, and progress is going fairly well. Earlier in the month of July, the foundation subcontractor mobilized as planned. This is Zone 1A, which is the northern section of the first classroom wing closest to Cabot Street. You can see the massive amounts of rebar. This area here is a typical pile cap. You can see if you look down through the steel web, you can see the original piles that are down in there. This is probably a pile cap that ties together 6 individual piles. All the reinforcing goes in. The formwork is starting to go around the top of them. And then you have grade beams that are tying together one pile cap on the corner with the next one further on down the line. Last week, we had our first concrete placement on the job, starting at that northwest corner of that zone 1. And today we had our third concrete placement. So 2 placements last week and a third one today. We'll be going approximately every other day from this point out. We've got full-time support on site from the testing consultant that's coordinated with Heary, and they're inspecting. We've got 8 to 10 iron workers on site every day tying this massive amount of steel. We would typically have 1 or 2 iron workers for 2 or 3 days a week. We've got 8 or 10 that are working every day, Monday through Friday on the job, just to try to keep up with the reinforcing. You can see the odd-shaped formwork here for the pile cap. Some of the piles are triangular shaped. They've got 3 piles. It's called a P3 pile cap. So you can see that here. And you can see on the ground some of the layout work that's going to precede some of the reinforcing steel work. Here's a better shot here of the 3 piles that have been driven, the reinforcing steel that's been welded to it, and the triangular shaped pile cap that's getting ready to be formed and reinforcing tied to it. I continue to try to use the same basic schedule update to give everybody an idea of where we are from the last meeting. I think the last time I presented this was back in May. I did eliminate the first couple of months off of the schedule just to show, obviously at this point, hopefully everybody knows that the demolition abatement is long gone. And this is tracking right here. The red line here shows where we are today. And you can see from the pile driving, the driving of the production piles, our schedule that we presented back in May originally had that work finishing up in Zone 4 sometime in the middle of August. And we actually finished that up last week, about 2 weeks ahead of schedule. We completed the design of the foundations. We bid that work out. We started the foundations earlier this month, and we're right on track with that work right now. I did put in a milestone date here just so that you can see my May schedule showed us starting structural steel on October 1st. Now that we've bid that work, now that we've negotiated that contract, I've added an activity in here starting the structural steel. We're actually going to start the structural steel immediately after Labor Day. So our target start date is September 6th, the Tuesday after Labor Day. That's our first delivery. We should start to set columns that very same day. And the columns will go all 4 stories. They're all one-piece columns. So you will start to see some immediate and dramatic progress out there early part of September. My original schedule here had structural steel extending into February. We've negotiated with the steel fabricator and erector to put 2 cranes on the job site, and we expect to be done in 3 months. So early January is when we expect to have the entire building frame up. And if all goes according to plan, in November and December, we hope to be doing structural concrete slabs on the elevated classroom sections, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor. So if all goes according to plan, by December 31st, we hope to have all those slabs in the classroom wings freed up to enable us to start the exterior envelope of the building and to allow us to start doing some of the overhead MEP work throughout the building. So as was said earlier, I think, a few months ago when we were dealing with some of the asbestos abatement issues and a little bit more damp proofing and some of the potential contaminated soil underneath the oil tank, we were tracking a couple of weeks behind schedule. Right now, we're right on track for schedule, probably about a week or 2 ahead. And come September, we'll be closer to a month ahead of schedule. So things are going very well on the construction side as they are on the design side and drawing side as well. I think that's it. I think we're ready for questions.
George?
I continue to be confused and disappointed by some of the soft responses I keep getting. I still don't understand why the 8th grade doesn't have its own technology lab and they don't have their own art lab. We're going to end up with a situation where we're going to have to mix them in with some of the other grades, which was one of the no-nos from the beginning of the program.
I'm sorry, no-no to mix 8th graders in with 7th graders?
We were gonna separate the
it?
grades all
No.
the way along the line.
No, we were going to
No,
create
never.
more of a 5-6 academy and a 7-8 academy. There's nothing, and in fact, there are appropriate ways to have
Well, that can be done.
any of the
but
integration across grades.
Of all the grades that need a technology lab, I think it's the 8th. And why were they chosen not to get the technology lab?
Okay, so let's
So I
hear
think
from it.
you have to remember that there's 12 maker spaces in this building. In addition to that, the technology piece that you're talking about are really there, and are there for the exploratory portion of the middle school schedule. We separated it 5, 6, 7, 8 on purpose because that's what we promised the community from the start. That means that the access to those spaces are going to be the 7th and 8th grade, and that will be their area, so there will not be a lot of mixing. Additionally, we only have one art teacher now. We will have to add a second art teacher because of the size of the building and the addition of one class.
So meaning there's
So
only
you don't
one,
need 3, you don't need more than 2 art rooms. When we look at the technology space is going to spill over into the maker spaces, in which case that ability to flex that space and maximize it is apparent throughout the whole thing. So adding an additional technology space, it wouldn't be used.
The program is being contrived so that you don't need the space. I understand what you're doing. But I still think from day one that we should have a technology space for the 8th grade as well as the rest of the grades. And similarly, you raise the other issue that, okay, you've got these maker spaces. One of the issues that was supposed to be is the maker spaces were going to be set up so that the students could start a project.
Correct.
Put it away, come back the next period, work on it without having to break it down.
Correct.
I'm still getting soft answers as, where are you going to put these
There's
partially built
there's
projects?
storage in all those rooms, George. There's lockable storage in all of those rooms, and the rooms themselves will be locked.
I haven't seen that, that's my problem.
Okay.
There's discussion about this.
Yeah.
And my other favorite project is the kickout spaces. Now, have we eliminated all the non-structural columns in the building?
let's wait on that and finish this. So would you, Dr. Hershey, or with any help, that you'd like, just kind of walk us through, you talked about the number of spaces in the building in total and how they're allotted to either 5, 6, or 7, 8?
Yeah, so there's 12 maker spaces. There is one for every wing of the building, no matter what floor you're on.
Yeah, it's a large.
So everyone will have
It's a large
that.
hallway.
Yep.
Yeah.
On the first floor and the third floor, additionally, there will be technology space, technology education space. So not computer labs, because we're not doing any computer labs whatsoever. And there's also art space on those floors. And those are designated for 7, 8 spaces on the third and fourth floor. And on the first and second floor, they're designated for 5 and 6 space. So they will be they will age appropriately, be outfitted for what the kids are capable of doing at those age levels. So obviously, as we look, and in addition, remember at the 8th grade level, there's also science rooms that are outfitted as science rooms. So there is a significant amount of ability for the teams to access areas that are highly technical and will be able to be utilized to work with STEM. But also remember that as we look at project-based learning, every project isn't going to be a STEM project. In some cases, it's going to be other projects.
So we end up with 2 art spaces and 2 technology, or 3 art spaces and 3 technology?
Two technology spaces and 2 art spaces. An art space and a technology space for the 5-6 academy, if you will, and a technology space and an art space for the 7-8. And that's consistent with what the MSBA would allow you as a maximum program for those spaces, because they would suggest, and appropriately so, that you wouldn't have enough students in the building to be able to occupy more spaces than that efficiently, just based on the number of periods that are available. with those 2 technology labs and those 2 art labs. I just wanted to clarify what Dr. Hershey said for the public who may not be familiar with all our discussions on the project. The reference to no computer labs in the building is because we have technology so well embedded in the building that the entire building is really a computer lab. Students will have access through their devices to all of the resources that you would typically see in a computer lab, but they'll have access to those resources indoors, outdoors, in the outdoor learning area, in the indoor learning area, in the commons area, in the maker spaces, in every single classroom, in the multi-purpose dining area, and throughout the entire school.
Could you clarify where that space is to put these little partially completed projects? Because the last time we went through this thing, we just had cubbies big enough to put in a coat and maybe a book bag. Or backpack.
There are a lot of movable storage units that are being purchased as part of the makerspace because they want to be able to reorganize those spaces constantly. And keep in mind that that's intended to be, if you look at the most successful models for how those spaces are being utilized by middle school students, that's intended to be a fluid space with as little built-in storage or built-in control of the space as possible. In an ideal world, you want the students to be able to organize their storage areas and their work areas and reorganize them constantly depending on the project that they're building. And the concept is not that the projects would be put away continually. In fact, just the opposite. They will be put away at times, and pieces of them may be put away at times. But one of the values of a maker-builder space, a project-based hands-on learning space, and its transparency to the remainder of the academic core and the entire building for that matter, is that you constantly have these projects on display where you do see the work constantly evolving as the students have time to apply things that parts that they may be fabricating, for example, in the technology lab, and bringing in and assembling in the maker-builder space. And the best models for those spaces, you see those projects constantly under construction in the space.
So part of the exercise of the FF&P committee is going to be to select movable storage for 125 kids for each floor?
We've already begun to talk about what that movable storage requirement would be as we've been designing the space, because certainly you want to plan a little bit for it. But yes, one of the items that will be a point of discussion when we move into the FF&E discussions that Troy described in September. And keep in mind, those will go on for months. That's not something where you sit down one time. I think the schedule now suggests that goes on for almost 8 or 9 months. But yes, movable storage for the Project-Based Learning Lab will be one component of a much greater furniture, fixture, and equipment programming exercise.
Thank you. You raised another question. Since we don't have computer labs, are we going one-to-one with the middle school?
So as we've said all along, it's one-to-one access. So will every child have a device? We're working on that right now to see whether that makes the most sense.
That's still to be decided.
Yeah, but
Okay.
one-to-one access means that there's going to be enough accessibility of
Of the bandwidth.
technology. Well, not just the bandwidth, but the actual devices themselves. So does it require 125 or 75 enough per team to make sure that they're available every time the kids need it? So we're going through that process right now to determine, and Judy can answer.
No, just a point about projects is that the project-based learning isn't always about something that needs to be stored. I mean, it could be a movie,
Oh, yeah.
a speech, a community. So it's not like all the students would have something to be stored with every project. It's a whole variety of
Understand, yeah.
end products
I'm
that
used
aren't
to the
necessarily
Carolina kids.
needing storage, so,
I'm used to the Carolina kids in the 4th grade to build a house
right,
out of cardboard. And that gets to be much bigger than a bread box.
right.
Yeah.
No, you're right, but I'm just saying that there's going to be a variety of
Yeah,
kinds of
there's a lot of
projects.
different
Right.
facets, but you got to plan for worst case.
Well, I think,
Otherwise, you don't have any, you don't do that.
I think Scott did a nice job outlining the potential and the accessibility that students and staff will have with not only the spaces in the maker space, but also in the classroom space. So I think we're excited about that change and that shift that we have, as opposed to we're quite limited right now. Now we're moving to a building that is almost limitless in what it can have. And when we talk about the FF&E, and I think that's what Troy was alluding to, there's going to be some meetings coming up where staff have to have some access and a voice into what some of those units will look like, of what we're planning on doing as we go forward. And that is a process that's going to take some time, as we learn over the course of last year when we did some work with the staff, is kind of outlining, designing some of the classroom spaces and what those would look like.
Thank you.
Anything else on that topic? I know George had another question before that. Anything else? Okay. Your other question was about,
With regard to the bump outs, we have eliminated all non-structural steel projections. So the only steel we have is structural steel. We thought that your question was too faceted, in that we also thought you were referring to some of the jogs in the building that we had at one point in time. And so I'll just comment on that. As a result of the feedback of this committee and some of the discussions here, we did eliminate a lot of the perimeter jogs in the building. The building has some locations where the floor plan may jog out, but it's because we've got a particular space like the Library Media Center or some other spaces that need that extra square footage. And the most efficient way to do it was to maintain the basic structural grid of the building and then just let one piece of it project out. So there's some locations where it does that. But we did, as a result of the discussions with this committee, reduce any projections that weren't required by program elements or the need for additional space.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with putting structural steel behind a box or a chase for electrical or plumbing. What I'm concerned about is twofold. One is building artificial columns for aesthetic reasons
Sure.
that you now got to drive around or you can't clean behind, and it costs extra money to build these extras, and that's driving cost.
Understood.
So now that you've taken them all out, how much did we save?
Understood. And if I could, just to your earlier comment, as a reminder, although we can't currently justify additional technology or art spaces as a result of the feedback from this committee, the structural steel in the building is designed so that some of those two-story volumes could support a future classroom should you decide to
Got
construct
plans
that.
at the wall you could hang a beam on, in other words?
Right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
other questions, thoughts, comments?
I know he didn't. He doesn't know.
Mr. Ailes?
Sure. I had a question about the construction timeline, Bob, or Tom or Mark or anybody who was involved with that. But when we were originally developing that, I know we were all very conscious about the different phases being done at different seasons and different, layering them so they would be done most efficiently with cost in mind. Now that we've pulled some of those timelines forward, which is commendable, are we pulling any of those phases into seasons or timeframes that aren't optimal to be doing them, and thus maybe potentially being more costly?
We are not. We are trying to optimize as much as we possibly can. Originally, we talked about, for instance, structural steel. Typically, you want to work structural steel through the winter and then start your slabs in the springtime. What we're doing is pulling back with two cranes out there erecting the steel. We're going to be able to finish that work in December, but it's going to finish up, for instance, Zone 1 early enough for us to start those slabs in November, December timeframe before the winter and get us a jump on that. We're sequencing some of the exterior framing around the building so that we can minimize the amount of temporary protections that we need to move into weather-sensitive work such as spray fireproofing, which once we get the majority of the permanent walls built around the classroom wings, we can put temporary heat inside those, do the spray fireproofing, and immediately start doing our overhead mechanical, electrical, plumbing work. What it does to us on the far end next fall of 2017, is we fully expect to have the entire perimeter of the building weather tight. We expect the roof to be on, we expect all the windows to be in, we expect the siding to be on, so that we're working we're doing finishes inside of a controlled climate, inside of a finished space, and to have all that work done. One of the discussions that we've had in the last couple of weeks is getting early access to the soccer field on the job site. And that is because the site work contractor is being very aggressive, very cooperative, and very proactive in trying to get all the underground utilities done in the next couple of months so they can put binder asphalt on the entire site before this coming winter. That will eliminate any of the weather problems or issues that might crop up with the clay soils and soft soils on the site during the winter, during next spring. So it's all advantages on trying to be able to do all that stuff in the optimum time and keeping that so that we're not moving into a worse situation schedule-wise.
Kind of thought that was the answer, but I had to ask.
You just turned that frown upside down is what you did. Mr.
Just
Pasta?
a quick comment. I think if I heard correctly, you said in the fall of 2017, we're going to see a building that has all the walls, windows, and a roof on top, which is exciting. Can you also kind of picture, what are we going to see come December? Because you said we're going to see some vastly different changes. So can you outline what December will look like on that site for us?
Sure. Starting in September with the erection of structural steel, the columns will come onto the site and the columns will be placed in that Zone 1, the closest classroom wing to Cabot Street. So that'll be framed from the foundation up through the 4th story through the roof. They'll start working on all the beams, they'll start working on all the decks, and they'll basically take probably about 4 or 5 weeks to get that Zone 1A area done, the classroom wing, the main entrance, and the library media center completed and framed. So you should see that sometime probably in the latter part of October. In November, they will be working on Zone 2 classroom wing and Zone 3 classroom wing. They'll have those probably complete by Thanksgiving. And then in December, January timeframe, they'll be working on the auditorium and the gymnasium section. At the same time, in November and December, we hope to be placing the concrete slabs in the first classroom wing and following right behind the structural steel work. As we're bidding out the trade contractors or the traditional filed sub-bidders, we hope to be awarding those contracts in November. As quickly as we can get submittals taken care of and contracts out to those folks, we hope to have a roof on the building as quickly as possible. There are some different roofing alternatives that let you work in colder weather, so we're hoping that sometime in December that we're starting the roof and we're putting roofing on the building, which again helps us to work with some of the other finishes inside the building, the spray fireproofing, which is susceptible to colder weather. But by doing the roof and by doing the exterior skin of the building, the walls and the gyp enclosures, we hope to be just putting some temporary enclosures in the window openings, have the roof going on, and start putting some temporary heat in the building come January timeframe.
Thank you.
Dad?
Just following up on Brian's question, sounds like you were planning on slab work in early spring, now you're pulling it up to late fall. So you say there's no winter conditions in either case, but are you, on balance, it would seem like we are going to be a fair bit ahead. Does that ultimately save the city money in the cost of the project, or is it?
We are, every day, every week, we're trying to make decisions to save the city money. We even modified on the fly, we modified the preparation pad that's out there to support the pile driving operation, which ultimately is going to save us more than $300,000 to the project. The spray fireproofing work is an activity that's going to need to take place probably in the January timeframe during winter. That's going to introduce some winter conditions, but we're not going to have temporary enclosures and temporary staging around the building that are going to be needed before we can do the temp heat. So the temporary heat process itself, we're trying to save as much as we can. If we can save 50% of the expense because we're using the permanent enclosure around the building, that's what our goal is.
Thank you.
George?
When you talk about these savings, how much of these savings come back to the city, and how much are they, is this a firm fixed price contract, or?
This is a fixed fee construction management contract. 100% of those savings come back to the city.
So you get the same fee no matter whether you run over or you run under?
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
We have a fixed fee on the entire CM project. So we put contingencies in with the early packages with demolition and abatement. For instance, on the abatement, we found a little bit more damp proofing than we expected, but we found less transite underground piping than we expected. So I think we're going to end up paying something like $10,000 extra on the damp proofing, but we saved $50,000 on the piping. So there'll be a net savings there. And on top of that, we didn't touch any of the contingency that we set aside should we find some unexpected things with that. So all of that goes back into the project, goes back into the contract, and goes back to the city to get to that, the final product.
Is there any incentive fee in this contract? No. Okay.
There's not.
Thank you.
We'll take one, though.
Ms. Biznick?
Can we move the item? Can we move the item?
Yes, are we ready, we ready to move on? Okay, where are we at? Where's the agenda? So if there are no more questions, we are looking at the vote on the 90% construction documents. Right? Any particular wording?
Just similar to all the ones in the past, that we're seeking the building committee's vote to allow the OPM to submit the 90% construction document package to the MSBA for
So
their
moved.
review.
I'm ready here to do it.
Mr.
Second.
Binns, second,
Second?
moves and second by Ms. Visnick, okay. Discussion. All those in favor, do we need to roll call? We don't need to
No,
roll
no,
call.
no.
All those in favor, say, let's do by hands. All those in favor?
Thank you.
Any opposed? All right, well, thank you all very, very much. Mark, what does that leave us with?
That's really it, especially if there are no more questions. If there's more questions, we can address them, but that-
Before I accept that motion to adjourn, just want to let you know that we've had a very brief preliminary discussion about organizing a site walk for the building committee, and talking with Bob about it, he was thinking early October would be a point where there'll be a lot more to see, and it'll be probably a good time to get out there and look around. So just keep that in mind. We'll be in touch about setting that up.
And no other meetings prior to that?
Haven't really asked that question. I haven't asked that question in terms of what makes sense with where we are with
Right.
the project for next building committee meeting.
this is the last design submission to the MSBA. We will probably, in the next 6 to 8 weeks, have the subcontractors pre-qualified. They'll finish the design up at the end of September. So that might be a time frame that I would think is reasonable. The latter part of September, the early part of October, to meet, to get more or less an update. And if you wanted to combine that with a site visit, that might be the most efficient way to proceed.
Yeah, that does seem like it may make sense. So we'll just one second, Bill. We'll kind of look a little more closely at that, with the thought of an update meeting combined with a site walk in that early October window of time.
Good idea.
Bill?
Are you going to issue a winning bidders list as to who's performing different trade work?
Yeah, oh yeah. In fact, what we have, and I can readily share it, is the list of firms that submitted their statement of qualifications. That I can send out if the building
He's talking
committee.
about successful bidders after it's bid.
So when we get to that point, sure.
Sure, that's required to be published. That's a statutory requirement.
Okay, sure. Anything else before we take a motion to adjourn? All right. George?
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Binns, seconded by Mr. Bouchard. Very quick on the draw. All those in favor of adjourning? Any opposed? Thank you all so much. We are adjourned. Enjoy the rest of your summer.